Emma Rodriguez never imagined that her greatest strength would become her deepest shame. When Brandon Cole and his crew cornered her in that abandoned bathroom and forced her to scrub the filthy floor with her bare hands, they had no idea they were humiliating a third-degree black belt who could have ended their reign of terror in seconds. But sometimes the most powerful weapon isn't the one you use. It's the one you choose not to use, until the moment when silence becomes more dangerous than action. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The stench hit Emma Rodriguez like a physical blow as Tyler Nash shoved her through the doorway of the East Wing bathroom. The sharp ammonia smell mixed with something far worse, something that spoke of neglect and deliberate destruction. Broken tiles crunched under her worn sneakers as she stumbled forward, catching herself against a rust-stained sink that had seen better decades. The mirror above it was cracked in a spiderweb pattern, reflecting her face in fractured pieces. Brown, eyes wide with shock, dark hair escaping from its careful ponytail, olive skin pale with sudden fear. "Welcome to your new office," Brandon Cole announced from behind her, his voice carrying that particular mix of arrogance and cruelty that came so naturally to the captain of Riverside High's football team. At 17, Brandon had the kind of easy confidence that money and athletic success could buy, combined with the casual brutality of someone who had never faced real consequences for his actions. His letterman jacket bore the school's wolf mascot, teeth bared in what might have been a grin or a snarl. Emma's hands trembled as she gripped the porcelain edge of the sink, her knuckles showing white against her skin. Every instinct screamed at her to turn around, to face him, to let her body remember the 8 years of training that had shaped her into something far more dangerous than these boys could imagine. But another voice, deeper and more painful, whispered the words her father had repeated countless times during their training sessions in their old garage back in Cedar Falls. True strength lies not in what you can do, but in what you choose not to do. The warrior who wins without fighting has achieved the greatest victory. Miguel Rodriguez had been dead for 2 years now, killed when a drunk driver ran a red light on a rainy Tuesday evening, but his voice still echoed in Emma's mind every time her muscles tensed with remembered cater forms. The discipline he had instilled in her, the philosophy of restraint and honor that had earned her a black belt at 14, now felt like chains around her wrists as Brandon Cole's reflection appeared behind hers in the broken mirror. "See, Emma," Brandon continued, using her name like it was something distasteful he had to scrape off his tongue. "We've been watching you for a while now, ever since you transferred here from whatever backwoods place you crawled out of. And we've noticed something about you." He stepped closer, close enough that she could smell his expensive cologne mixing with the bathroom's noxious atmosphere. "You think you're better than everyone else, walking around with your head down, ignoring people when they try to be friendly. That's not how things work at Riverside High." Marcus Webb, the third member of their little pack, positioned himself by the door with his arms crossed. Where Tyler was all nervous energy and barely contained violence, Marcus was cold calculation, the one who made sure no witnesses wandered into their private moments of entertainment. His presence there meant this wasn't some spontaneous encounter. They had planned this, chosen this abandoned bathroom in the oldest part of the school where the security cameras had never been updated and the janitors only bothered to check. Once a week, Emma forced herself to take a slow, steady breath through her nose, the way Sensei Yamamoto had taught her during those early days when her temper had gotten the better of her technique. In through the nose, hold for 4 counts, out through the mouth. The breathing exercise was supposed to center her, to find that place of calm readiness that made a true martial artist. Instead, it only made her more aware of the trapped air in the windowless room, the way the fluorescent light overhead flickered with an electrical buzz that set her teeth on edge. Now we could have handled this the easy way, Brandon went on, his tone conversational, almost friendly. A simple conversation about respect, about understanding your place in the social order here. But you've been avoiding us, haven't you? Slipping away whenever we try to have a chat. That shows a lack of respect, Emma, and disrespect has consequences. Tyler Nash giggled, actually giggled, a high, unpleasant sound that spoke of someone who enjoyed others' discomfort far too much. Tell her about the consequences, Brandon. Tell her what happens to girls who think they're too good for us. Emma's reflection in the cracked mirror showed her fear, but it also showed something else. A subtle shift in her stance, a slight lowering of her center of gravity that any trained eye would have recognized as a fighter's instinctive preparation. Her father had drilled defensive positions into her until they became as natural as breathing, until her body knew how to react before her mind could even process a threat. But Brandon and his friends saw only a scared new girl in second hand. Clothes, someone whose mother worked night shifts at the hospital and who qualified for the free lunch program. They saw weakness where strength had chosen to hide itself. "The thing is," Brandon said, his voice dropping to an almost intimate whisper, "this bathroom hasn't been properly cleaned in months. Look at that floor, Emma. Really look at it." He grabbed her chin with surprisingly gentle fingers, forcing her to look down at the grimy tiles beneath their feet. Years of neglect had left stains that spoke of unspeakable things, dark patches that no amount of industrial cleaning could ever fully remove. Someone should really do something about that. Someone who understands the value of hard work and knows their place in the world. Emma's stomach lurched as understanding crashed over her like a cold wave. The cruelty of it was breathtaking in its calculated precision, not just physical intimidation, but humiliation designed to break something fundamental inside her. They weren't just demanding submission, they were demanding that she degrade herself in a way that would poison her self-respect long after any bruises had healed. "You can't be serious," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the electric hum of the dying fluorescent fixture. Tyler's giggle turned into genuine laughter. "Oh, she thinks we're joking, Brandon. She actually thinks this is some kind of game." "No games here," Brandon replied, his grip on her chin tightening just enough to leave marks. "Just a simple lesson in respect. You're going to get down on your hands and knees, and you're going to scrub this floor clean. With your hands, Emma. No gloves, no brushes, no tools. Just you and the dirt and the understanding that at Riverside High, everyone has their place." The words hit Emma like physical blows, each one carefully chosen to maximize the psychological damage. This wasn't random bullying. This was character assassination, an attempt to remake her in their image of what she should be. Weak, submissive, broken. But what they didn't know, what they couldn't possibly understand, was that the girl standing before them had spent years learning to break boards with her bare hands, to move with the fluid grace of someone who had mastered 17 different kata forms, to channel aggression into precise, devastating techniques that could end a fight. Before it truly began, the calluses on her knuckles weren't from farm work or manual labor. They were from 10,000 practice punches against a heavy bag in her father's garage, from sparring sessions where she had learned to read an opponent's intentions in the subtle shift of their weight, the tension in their shoulders, the distance between their feet. Emma Rodriguez was not the victim they thought they had cornered. She was a weapon that had chosen to remain sheathed, a storm that had decided to appear as gentle rain. But storms, once unleashed, rarely remembered why they had chosen to be calm. Tyler moved closer, his excitement palpable in the confined space. "Maybe we should help her understand, Brandon. Maybe she needs a little encouragement to get started." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "Patience, Tyler," Brandon said, though his own voice carried an edge of anticipation. "Emma's a smart girl. She'll figure out what needs to be done. Won't you, Emma?" The question hung in the air like a blade, sharp and waiting. Emma's reflection stared back at her from the broken mirror, fractured into a dozen different versions of herself. In one fragment, she saw the scared transfer student who just wanted to finish high school without making waves. In another, she saw her father's daughter, trained from childhood to protect herself and others. In the third, she saw something else entirely, a girl who had been pushed too far and was beginning to remember what she was truly capable of. Her hands had stopped trembling. The change was so subtle that none of the boys noticed, but Emma felt it like a physical transformation. The fear was still there, coiled tight in her chest, but it was no longer the helpless terror of a victim. It was the sharp, focused alertness of a predator, recognizing other predators and beginning to calculate distances, angles, the precise amount of force needed to neutralize three threats in a confined space. But her father's voice echoed again, in her memory, stronger now. "The greatest warriors are those who win without fighting. Honor lies not in victory, but in knowing when victory is not worth the cost." What cost would victory carry here? Tyler would be unconscious before he understood what had happened. A quick elbow to the solar plexus, followed by a knee strike that would drop him like a stone. Marcus would try to rush her, but the confined space would work against him. A simple hip throw would send him into the wall with enough force to keep him down. Brandon would be last, and by then, his confidence would have transformed into confusion and then terror, as he realized he had cornered something far more dangerous than he could handle. But then what? How would she explain 3 injured football players to Principal Johnson? How would she justify the violence to her mother, who worked 2 jobs to keep them afloat and couldn't afford the legal troubles that would follow? How? Would she live with herself if she used her skills in anger rather than protection? If she became the aggressor rather than the defender? The internal war raged in the space of seconds, honor battling against self-preservation, training fighting against wisdom. And in the end, Emma Rodriguez made a choice that would haunt her for weeks to come. She lowered herself to her knees. The cold tile bit through her jeans as she placed her hands flat against the stained floor, feeling the grit and filth beneath her palms. The same hands that could break a board with a single strike, that had earned medals in 3 different tournaments, that carried calluses from years of dedicated training. Those hands now pressed against decades of accumulated grime and worse. Tyler's laughter echoed off the bathroom walls, sharp and triumphant. "Look at that, Brandon. She's actually doing it. She's actually getting down in the dirt where she belongs." "Smart girl," Brandon murmured, his voice thick with satisfaction. "I knew you'd see reason eventually." "But Emma..." He crouched down beside her, bringing his face level with hers. "This is just the beginning. This is your reminder of what happens when you forget your place. Tomorrow, and every day after that, you're going to remember this moment. You're going to remember what it felt like to kneel in the dirt, and you're going to think twice before you ignore us again." Emma's vision blurred, though whether from tears or rage, she couldn't say. Her hands moved mechanically across the floor, her father's training keeping her movements controlled, even as her spirit screamed in protest. Each scrape of her palms against the rough tile was a betrayal of everything she had learned, every principle he had tried to instill in her. But she endured it. She endured the laughter, the crude comments, the casual cruelty of 3 boys who thought they had broken something beautiful. She endured it because the alternative, letting them see what she really was, what she was capable of, felt like a line she couldn't cross without losing something essential about herself. When they finally left, their laughter echoing down the empty hallway, Emma remained on her knees in the filthy bathroom, staring at her reflection in the cracked mirror. The girl looking back at her was someone she didn't recognize. Not the confident martial artist her father had raised. Not the scared transfer student she had tried to become, but something new and dangerous and utterly alone. She raised her hands and looked at them, scraped, dirty, trembling with suppressed violence. These hands had once broken boards and earned trophies. Now they were stained with humiliation and the weight of a choice that felt like betrayal. But as Emma Rodriguez finally stood up and walked to the sink to wash the filth from her hands, she made a promise to herself. This would be the last time. Whatever happened next, whatever price she had to pay, she would never kneel in the dirt for anyone ever again. The storm had been contained today, but storms don't forget. They only grow stronger in the darkness, waiting for the moment when calm is no longer an option. And the only choice left is to remind the world what weather can really do. Emma Rodriguez had always prided herself on being invisible. In the 3 weeks since she and her mother had arrived in Millbrook, Ohio, she had perfected the art of moving through Riverside High like a ghost, head down, shoulders hunched, taking the longest routes between classes to avoid the main corridors where the popular students congregated. Her locker, number 247, was strategically located in a forgotten alcove near the old chemistry labs, far from the social epicenter of the school where Brandon Cole and his friends held court. The morning after the bathroom incident, Emma stood before that locker with hands that still bore faint scrapes from the previous day's humiliation. The combination lock felt heavier than usual as she spun the numbers. Her father's birthday, a detail that usually brought comfort, but now felt like a reminder of all the ways she was failing to live up to his memory. The narrow hallway around her was mercifully empty, most students having already claimed their books and headed to first period. This isolation had become her refuge, these quiet moments before the school day truly began, when she could pretend she was still the person she used to be. Her reflection in the small magnetic mirror stuck to the inside of her locker door showed the truth she tried to hide from the world. Dark circles shadowed her brown eyes, evidence of another sleepless night spent replaying every moment of yesterday's encounter. Her long black hair, usually her one vanity, hung limp and lifeless around her shoulders. The purple sweater she wore, a hand-me-down from a church donation box that her mother had carefully mended, hung loose on her small frame, contributing to the image of fragility that made her such an appealing target. But appearances, Emma knew better than most, could be devastatingly deceptive. Beneath that oversized sweater lay muscles carved by years of disciplined training, shoulders that had learned to generate devastating power through proper hip rotation, hands that could strike with the precision of a surgeon and the force of a sledgehammer. Her legs, hidden beneath faded jeans that were 2 inches too short, had been trained to support her weight in perfect balance while delivering kicks that could shatter wooden boards. Every part of her body was a weapon that had been honed and refined through countless hours of practice, yet she moved through the world like prey. The irony wasn't lost on her. At Cedar Falls Martial Arts Academy, she had been a star pupil, the teenager that visiting instructors would ask to demonstrate advanced techniques. Sensei Yamamoto had often told her that she possessed that rare combination of natural athleticism and mental discipline that could take her far in competitive martial arts. Her tournament trophies, now packed away in boxes in their cramped apartment, told the story of a young woman who had never known defeat in fair combat. But Riverside High wasn't a dojo, and the rules here were written by people like Brandon Cole, whose power came not from skill or honor, but from social position and the willingness to inflict cruelty without consequence. In this environment, her martial arts training felt like a burden rather than a gift, a constant reminder of the violence she was capable of but could never permit herself to use. Emma's first period was advanced placement English with Mrs. Patterson, a stern woman in her 50s who had taught at Riverside for over 2 decades. The classroom was her favorite place in the entire school, not because of the subject matter, though she genuinely enjoyed literature, but because Mrs. Patterson ran her classroom with an iron fist that even the most privileged students respected. Brandon and his crew had attempted to disrupt her classes during the first week of school, but one withering stare from Mrs. Patterson had been enough to convince them to find easier targets for their entertainment. As Emma slipped into her usual seat in the back corner, she caught sight of Brandon entering the classroom with his typical swagger. His letterman jacket was perfectly pressed, his blonde hair styled with the kind of casual perfection that required significant time and expensive products. Behind him followed Tyler Nash, whose nervous energy was already evident in the way his fingers drummed against his thigh. Marcus Webb brought up the rear, his cold grey eyes scanning the room with the calculating gaze of someone always looking for weaknesses to exploit. The three of them commanded attention simply by existing, their presence shifting the entire dynamic of the room as other students turned to watch their entrance. Emma forced herself to look down at her worn copy of To Kill a Mockingbird, though the words on the page might as well have been written in a foreign language for all the sense they made. Her peripheral vision tracked Brandon's movement as he chose a seat 3 rows ahead of her, close enough that she could smell his expensive cologne. Mrs. Patterson entered the classroom with her characteristic brisk efficiency, dropping a stack of papers on her desk with a sound that immediately commanded silence. At 53, Eleanor Patterson was a woman who had learned to project authority through sheer force of will rather than physical intimidation. Her grey hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and her dark eyes missed nothing as they swept across the rows of students. She had been teaching long enough to recognize the signs of trouble brewing, and Emma had noticed those sharp eyes lingering on her with increasing concern over the past few days. Today, we're going to discuss the concept of moral courage as presented in Harper Lee's novel, Mrs. Patterson announced, her voice carrying easily to every corner of the room. Can anyone give me an example of a character who demonstrates moral courage and explain what sets that apart from physical courage? Several hands shot up immediately, but Mrs. Patterson's gaze found Emma in the back corner. Miss Rodriguez, what's your perspective on this question? Emma's heart hammered against her ribs as every head in the classroom turned toward her. Public speaking had never been her strength, and the attention of 30 pairs of eyes, including 3 that held distinctly malicious interest, made her mouth go dry. She cleared her throat softly and forced herself to speak. Atticus Finch shows moral courage when he defends Tom Robinson, even though he knows it will bring social consequences. Physical courage is about facing immediate danger, but moral courage is about doing what's right, even when it costs you everything you value. The words came out steadier than she felt, and Mrs. Patterson nodded approvingly. Excellent analysis, Miss Rodriguez. And what do you think Lee is suggesting about the relationship between power and the ability to act on moral courage? Emma's mind immediately went to her situation with Brandon and his friends, to the choice she had made in that bathroom to submit rather than fight. I think the novel suggests that moral courage is hardest for people who have the most to lose. People with power have to risk that power to do what's right, and people without power have to risk what little they have. Either way, it requires sacrifice. Very insightful, Mrs. Patterson said, though her eyes lingered on Emma with an expression that suggested she heard something beyond literary analysis in those words. Courage, as Lee presents it, isn't the absence of fear. It's action in spite of fear. Brandon chose that moment to turn around in his seat, ostensibly to look out the window, but actually to catch Emma's eye. The smile he gave her was subtle enough that Mrs. Patterson couldn't see it, but venomous enough to make Emma's stomach clench with renewed fear. It was a reminder, a promise that yesterday's humiliation was only the beginning of what he had planned for her. The rest of the class period passed in a blur of discussion about heroism and moral complexity, themes that felt like cruel jokes given Emma's current circumstances. When the bell rang, she remained in her seat while the other students filed out, hoping to avoid the hallway crush where an accidental bump or shove could be disguised as normal teenage clumsiness. Mrs. Patterson was erasing the whiteboard when she spoke without turning around. "Miss Rodriguez, a word, please." Emma's stomach dropped as she approached the teacher's desk, certain that somehow Mrs. Patterson had detected the undercurrents of tension in the classroom. The older woman set down her eraser and turned to face Emma directly, her expression gentle but concerned. "I've noticed you seem troubled lately," Mrs. Patterson said quietly. "Is everything all right at home? Are you adjusting well to the move?" The kindness in her voice almost broke Emma's resolve entirely. It would be so easy to tell her everything about the bathroom, about Brandon's threats, about the growing weight of fear that settled heavier on her shoulders each day. But what could Mrs. Patterson do? Brandon was the star quarterback whose father donated generously to the school's athletic programs. Tyler's mother was president of the PTA. Marcus's family owned half the commercial real estate in downtown Millbrook. Emma was just a scholarship student whose mother worked nights at the hospital and who qualified for free lunch. "I'm fine, Mrs. Patterson," Emma lied, forcing a smile that felt like broken glass. "Just tired. My mom's been working extra shifts, so I've been helping out more at home." Mrs. Patterson studied her face for a long moment, clearly unconvinced, but apparently recognizing that pushing wouldn't yield results. "Well, if you ever need someone to talk to, my door is always open. And Emma, remember what we discussed about moral courage. Sometimes the most important battles are the ones we fight for ourselves." Emma nodded and escaped into the hallway, where the passing period chaos provided blessed anonymity. She navigated the crowded corridors with practiced efficiency, keeping close to the walls and avoiding eye contact with anyone who might recognize her. Her route to second period took her past the gymnasium, where she could hear the sharp whistle of Coach Martinez running the JV basketball team through drills. The sound stopped her in her tracks, bringing with it a flood of memories from her old life in Cedar Falls. She had been on the track team there, her martial arts training giving her an edge in sprint events that her coach had been eager to develop. Running had been her second love after karate, the pure joy of speed and the burn of well-earned exhaustion in her legs. Here at Riverside, she hadn't even considered trying out for any teams. The idea of drawing that kind of attention to herself, of putting herself in situations where she would be alone with coaches and teammates who might ask uncomfortable questions, was terrifying. But as she stood outside the gym, listening to the familiar sounds of athletic competition, Emma felt a pang of loss so acute it nearly brought tears to her eyes. This was what Brandon and his friends were stealing from her, not just her peace of mind, but her very identity. The person she had been in Cedar Falls, confident and accomplished and unafraid, was disappearing piece by piece under the weight of their systematic intimidation. Her second period was advanced biology with Mr. Stevens, a young teacher fresh out of college, who was still enthusiastic enough to believe he could make cellular respiration exciting for teenagers. Emma liked his classes because he focused entirely on the science, rarely calling on students for anything beyond factual responses that could be found in the textbook. The lab tables were arranged for pairs, and Emma had managed to claim a spot at the back table with Sarah Kim, a quiet Korean-American girl who seemed as interested in avoiding attention as Emma was. Sarah was bent over her microscope when Emma arrived, carefully adjusting the focus to examine a prepared slide of plant cells. She looked up as Emma sat down, offering a small smile that was the first genuinely friendly expression Emma had received from a classmate all week. "Did you finish the reading about photosynthesis?" Sarah asked quietly, her voice barely audible over the general classroom chatter. Emma nodded, pulling out her notebook to show the careful diagram she had drawn the night before. Studying had become her refuge, the one area where she could still excel and feel some measure of control over her life. The precision required for scientific illustration reminded her of the focus needed for martial arts forms, the same attention to detail, the same requirement for mental discipline. "These are incredible," Sarah said, studying Emma's drawings with genuine admiration. "You should think about taking art classes. Mrs. Chen in the art department would love these." The compliment warmed Emma more than it should have, a reminder that she was still capable of creating something beautiful despite everything else that was happening in her life. But the suggestion about art classes also brought a familiar stab of anxiety. Art meant group projects, critiques, exhibitions, all situations that would put her in the spotlight and potentially in Brandon's crosshairs. "Maybe," Emma said non-committally, though she had no intention of following through. Safety lay in invisibility, in being so unremarkable that she could move through her high school years without attracting any more negative attention. The class proceeded with Mr. Stevens explaining the intricacies of chloroplast structure, while Emma took meticulous notes and tried to ignore the way Tyler Nash kept turning around from his seat 2 tables away to stare at her. His attention felt like insects crawling across her skin, a constant reminder that she was being watched and evaluated for weaknesses. When he finally turned back to his own work, Emma realized her hands were shaking enough to make her handwriting nearly illegible. During lunch, Emma made her way to the school library, a vast space that occupied most of the 2nd floor of the main building. Riverside High was proud of its library, one of the few areas where budget cuts hadn't affected the quality of resources available to students. Tall windows let in natural light that highlighted rows of books stretching from floor to ceiling, and comfortable reading nooks provided quiet spaces for studying or just escaping from the social pressures of the cafeteria. Emma had claimed a small table in the reference section, far from the popular areas where students gathered to socialize. She unpacked her lunch, a peanut butter sandwich and an apple that her mother had carefully wrapped in reused plastic bags, and opened her chemistry textbook to begin working on that evening's homework assignment. The routine of normal academic work provided a comforting illusion that her life was proceeding normally, that she was just another student focused on getting good grades and preparing for college. The illusion shattered when Lily Chen approached. Her table, carrying her own lunch tray and wearing an expression of determined friendliness that immediately put Emma on guard. Lily was a junior like Emma, though her confidence and social ease made her seem older. She had short black hair, cut in a stylish bob, and wore clothes that managed to be both trendy and practical. The kind of effortless style that Emma had never mastered even before her family's financial situation made such considerations irrelevant. "Mind if I sit here?" Lily asked, though she was already pulling out the chair across from Emma. "The cafeteria is total chaos today because of some drama with the cheerleaders, and I need somewhere quiet to finish my computer science homework." Emma nodded reluctantly, closing her chemistry book to make room on the small table. She had noticed Lily in several of her classes, but had never spoken to her directly, though she knew Lily had a reputation as one of the smartest students in their grade. She was also known for her involvement in the school's technology programs, often helping teachers troubleshoot computer problems and maintaining the school's website. "You're Emma Rodriguez, right?" Lily continued, unpacking a lunch that looked like it had been prepared by someone who actually had time to care about nutrition and presentation. "You transferred here from Cedar Falls?" Emma nodded again, uncertain where this conversation was heading and hyper-aware that any new social connection could potentially make her a more visible target. "Yes, about 3 weeks ago." "That must be tough, starting junior year at a new school," Lily said, with what seemed like genuine sympathy. I've been at Riverside since kindergarten, so I can't imagine having to figure out all the social dynamics from scratch. Have you been able to make many friends yet? The question was innocuous enough, but it highlighted the stark reality of Emma's situation. In 3 weeks, she had managed exactly 0 meaningful connections with her classmates, a fact that would have been embarrassing even without the additional context of Brandon's harassment. At Cedar Falls, she had been part of a close-knit group of friends centered around the Martial Arts Academy, students who shared her dedication to training and her respect for the discipline it required. "I'm still settling in," Emma said carefully, not wanting to admit to the loneliness that had become as constant as breathing. "It takes time to adjust to a new place." Lily studied her for a moment, and Emma had the uncomfortable feeling that those dark eyes were seeing more than she wanted to reveal. There was an intelligence there that reminded her of Sensei Yamamoto, the ability to read body language and emotional states with uncomfortable accuracy. "Well, if you ever want someone to show you around or just hang out, let me know," Lily offered, pulling out a laptop that looked like it cost more than Emma's mother made in a month. "I know Riverside can seem pretty cliquish at first, but there are good people here once you know where to look." Emma managed a smile that felt more genuine than any expression she had worn in days. "Thanks. That's really nice of you." They worked in comfortable silence for several minutes, Emma returning to her chemistry problems while Lily typed rapidly on her laptop, occasionally muttering under her breath about coding syntax errors. The normalcy of the interaction, too, students doing homework together in the library, felt precious to Emma, a reminder of what her high school experience could have been under different circumstances. That fragile peace was shattered when Tyler Nash appeared at their table, materializing with the sudden presence of a predator who had been stalking its prey. His usual nervous energy was more pronounced than usual, manifesting in the way his fingers drummed against his leg, and his eyes darted around the library as if checking for witnesses. "Emma," he said, his voice pitched low enough that the librarian at the main desk couldn't hear but loud enough to carry clearly to both girls. "Brandon wants to see you after school today, behind the gym, where the buses drop off. Don't keep him waiting." The message delivered. Tyler turned and walked away without waiting for a response, leaving Emma staring after him with her heart hammering against her ribs. The casual nature of the summons, delivered in front of Lily as if it were perfectly normal, felt like another calculated humiliation. Brandon was making it clear that her business was no longer private, that his control over her was something he could exercise openly. Lily looked between Emma and Tyler's retreating figure with obvious confusion and growing concern. "What was that about? Do you know Brandon Cole?" Emma's mind raced as she tried to formulate a response that wouldn't reveal the true nature of her situation, while also not outright lying to someone who had just offered her friendship. The weight of isolation was crushing enough without adding deception to people who genuinely seemed to care. "It's nothing important," she said finally, though her voice betrayed the anxiety that was making her stomach churn. "Just school stuff." Lily's expression made it clear she wasn't buying the casual dismissal, but she didn't push the issue directly. Instead, she leaned forward slightly and lowered her voice. "Emma, I don't know you very well yet, but I've been at this school long enough to recognize trouble when I see it. Brandon Cole and his friends aren't people you want to get involved with unless you absolutely have to." The warning was delivered with such genuine concern that Emma felt tears threatening to blur her vision. It was the first time since arriving at Riverside that anyone had acknowledged, even indirectly, that Brandon posed a threat. The validation of her fear, the recognition that she wasn't just being paranoid or oversensitive, was almost overwhelming. "I'll be careful," Emma managed, though they both knew that careful might not be enough when dealing with someone like Brandon. The rest of the lunch period passed in tense silence, with Emma unable to concentrate on her homework and Lily stealing worried glances at her every few minutes. When the bell rang, signaling the end of lunch, Lily reached across the table and touched Emma's hand briefly. "Remember what I said about finding good people here," she said quietly. "Sometimes the best thing you can do is not face problems alone." Emma nodded, gathering her books with hands that had started trembling again. The afternoon stretched ahead of her like a minefield, each class period bringing her closer to the confrontation that Brandon had summoned her to attend. As she made her way through the crowded hallways toward her next class, Emma found herself unconsciously cataloguing escape routes and defensive positions, her martial arts training asserting itself despite her conscious efforts to suppress it. Her third period was American history with Coach Martinez, who doubled as the school's wrestling coach and had a reputation for running his classroom like a military operation. Emma typically enjoyed the structure and discipline of his teaching style, but today she found herself studying him with new eyes. At 45, Ricardo Martinez was a compact man with graying hair and the kind of controlled physicality that spoke of continued athletic training. His military bearing wasn't just an affectation. Emma had heard other students mention that he was a veteran who had served multiple deployments overseas before returning to civilian life as an educator. As Coach Martinez lectured about the causes of World War I, Emma found herself wondering what he would do if he knew about Brandon's harassment. Would his military background make him more likely to take action, or would the political realities of small-town high school dynamics force him to look the other way like everyone else seemed to do? The uncertainty was maddening, another reminder of how isolated she truly was in this situation. When class ended, Emma lingered at her desk while the other students filed out, ostensibly organizing her notes, but actually trying to work up the courage to approach Coach Martinez. The classroom emptied until it was just the two of them, and still she sat frozen by indecision and fear. Finally, Coach Martinez looked up from his desk and noticed her hesitation. "Something on your mind, Rodriguez?" he asked, using the military-style address he employed with all his students. His tone was neutral, but not unfriendly, and Emma caught a hint of the concern that seemed to be her teacher's default response to her obvious distress. Emma opened her mouth to speak, then closed it again as the words refused to come. How could she explain the situation without sounding like a helpless victim? How could she ask for help without admitting that she was capable of defending herself but choosing not to? The complexity of her situation made it almost impossible to articulate, even to someone who might be sympathetic. "I'm fine, Coach," she said finally, the lie tasting bitter on her tongue. "Just trying to make sure I understand the assignment." Coach Martinez studied her for a moment with the same penetrating gaze that Lily had employed earlier, and Emma had the uncomfortable feeling that her deception was transparent to anyone who bothered to really look. But like Mrs. Patterson before, he seemed to recognize that pushing wouldn't yield results. "Well, if you need any clarification on the material, don't hesitate to ask," he said, returning to his paperwork. "And Rodriguez, remember that sometimes the most important battles are the ones we choose to fight, but timing and strategy matter as much as courage." The words hit Emma like a physical blow, so close to her own internal struggle that she wondered if somehow he had intuited the nature of her dilemma. She mumbled a thank you and fled the classroom, leaving Coach Martinez staring thoughtfully after her retreating figure. Her final period of the day was advanced placement physics with Dr. Patel, a brilliant woman who had left a career in engineering to teach high school students. The subject matter required the kind of mental focus that Emma normally found calming. But today, even the elegant equations of motion and energy couldn't distract her from the approaching confrontation with Brandon. Every glance at the clock showed another minute ticking away toward the end of school. toward the moment when she would have to face whatever new humiliation he had planned. As the final bell rang and students began packing their bags, Emma moved, with deliberate slowness, hoping to delay the inevitable as long as possible. But eventually, she could no longer justify remaining in the classroom, and she made her way through the emptying hallways toward her locker. The building felt different after hours, larger and more echo-prone, with the sounds of her footsteps seeming to announce her presence to anyone who might be listening. Her locker was in a section of the building that emptied quickly after school, most students eager to catch their buses or meet friends in more central locations. Emma spun her combination with fingers that felt numb and clumsy, retrieving the few books she would need for homework that she probably wouldn't be able to concentrate on anyway. As she closed the metal door, she caught sight of her reflection in the small mirror and was startled by what she saw. The girl looking back at her bore little resemblance to the confident martial artist she had been just a few months ago. Fear had carved new lines around her eyes and mouth, and her posture spoke of someone who had learned to make herself as small and unobtrusive as possible. But beneath that exterior, Emma could still see traces of the person her father had trained her to be. The steady gaze, the unconscious balance, the hands that remembered their strength even when their owner tried to forget. Taking a deep breath that tasted of industrial cleaning products and teenage anxiety, Emma shouldered her backpack and began the long walk toward whatever waited for her behind the gymnasium. The hallways that had seemed crowded and chaotic just minutes before now felt abandoned and threatening, every shadow potentially hiding someone who meant her harm. As she pushed through the heavy doors that led to the exterior of the building, Emma Rodriguez made a silent promise to herself. Whatever happened in the next few minutes, whatever new degradation Brandon had planned for her, she would endure it. She would survive it. And someday, somehow, she would find a way to reclaim the strength that fear had stolen from her. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the empty courtyard as Emma walked toward her appointment with humiliation, unaware that in a cluttered apartment across town, her mother was at that very moment discovering a box of her late husband's belongings that would change everything. Hidden beneath layers of tournament medals and faded photographs lay a journal filled with her father's thoughts on martial arts philosophy, including detailed notes about a technique he had learned but never taught, a way of fighting that used an opponent's aggression against them while maintaining perfect moral clarity. But that discovery was still hours away, and Emma Rodriguez walked alone into the gathering darkness behind Riverside High, carrying nothing but her fear and the fading memory of who she used to be. The space behind Riverside High's gymnasium felt like a forgotten corner of the world, where broken asphalt gave way to weeds, and the chain-link fence that separated school property from the industrial district beyond was more rust than metal. Emma stood at the edge of this desolate area, her backpack clutched against her chest like armor, watching Brandon Cole emerge from the shadows cast by the building's bulk. The late afternoon sun painted everything in shades of amber and threat, and the distant hum of traffic from the main road seemed impossibly far away. Brandon wasn't alone. Tyler Nash flanked him to the left, that familiar nervous energy radiating from him like heat waves, while Marcus Webb took position near the only exit, a narrow gap between the gym and the maintenance building that led back to the student parking lot. The choreography of their positioning was too precise to be accidental, and Emma recognized the tactical setup with the part of her mind that her father had trained to assess threats and escape routes. "You came," Brandon said, his voice carrying that same casual cruelty that had marked their bathroom encounter. "I wasn't sure you would. Thought maybe you'd run home to Mommy instead." Emma remained silent, her jaw clenched tight enough to make her teeth ache. Every instinct screamed at her to speak, to defend herself, to show some spark of defiance, but she had learned that engaging with Brandon only provided him with more ammunition for his psychological warfare. Her silence, however, seemed to irritate him more than any response could have. "Cat got your tongue?" Tyler chimed in, his giggle sharp and ugly in the still air. Or maybe she's just remembering how good she looked on her knees yesterday. The reference to the bathroom hit Emma like a physical blow, bringing with it a fresh wave of shame and anger that made her hands tremble where they gripped her backpack straps. The memory of that grimy floor, the feel of decades-old filth under her palms, the sound of their laughter, it all crashed over her again with vivid intensity. "Here's the thing, Emma," Brandon continued, stepping closer until she could smell his cologne mixed with the metallic scent of the chain-link fence behind her. "Yesterday was just orientation, a little introduction to how things work around here. Today, we're going to discuss your ongoing responsibilities." Emma's heart hammered against her ribs as she processed the implications of his words. This wasn't going to be a single incident, a one-time humiliation that she could endure and move past. Brandon was outlining a campaign of systematic degradation, a long-term arrangement that would make her high school experience a living nightmare. "See, I've been thinking about our conversation yesterday," Brandon said, his tone conversational despite the menace underlying every word. "And I realized we didn't really establish clear expectations for your behavior going forward. That's on me. I should have been more specific about what respect looks like." Marcus spoke for the first time, his voice flat and emotionless. "She needs a demonstration, something that really drives the point home." Emma's peripheral vision caught movement near the maintenance building, and for a moment hope flared in her chest. But it was only a stray cat, thin and mangy, that darted between the dumpsters and disappeared into the growing shadows. The reminder of how isolated this location was made her stomach clench with renewed fear. "I have homework to do," Emma said, quietly, testing whether Brandon would allow her even the pretense of having other obligations. Tyler's laugh was sharp and mocking. "Homework? She thinks she has homework to do. That's precious." "Oh, you'll have homework," Brandon agreed, his smile cold and calculating. "But it's not the kind they assign in classrooms. See, your assignment for tonight is to write me an essay, 500 words about why transfer students need to show proper respect to their betters." And Emma... He leaned in closer, his breath hot against her ear. "I want you to be very specific about what you learned yesterday. Very detailed." The request was designed to be maximally humiliating, forcing her to not only relive her degradation, but to articulate it in writing, to create a permanent record of her submission that Brandon could use against her indefinitely. The psychological sophistication of the torture was breathtaking in its cruelty. "I won't do that," Emma said, the words emerging before she could stop them. The defiance in her voice surprised even her, a spark of the person she used to be breaking. Through the fear that had paralyzed her for weeks, the change in Brandon's expression was immediate and dangerous. The casual mockery disappeared, replaced by something much darker and more predatory. "Excuse me?" Emma's training kicked in automatically, her body shifting into a subtle defensive stance that distributed her weight evenly between both feet and gave her maximum options for movement. The motion was so ingrained that she wasn't even conscious of it, but Marcus noticed immediately. "Look at that," Marcus said, his voice sharpening with interest. "Little Mouse thinks she's tough all of a sudden." Brandon's eyes narrowed as he studied Emma's posture, taking in details that most people would miss. The way her hands had shifted position on her backpack straps, turning them into potential weapons. The slight bend in her knees that spoke of coiled energy. The way her head had come up, eyes alert and calculating rather than downcast and submissive. "Tyler," Brandon said without taking his eyes off Emma, "I think our new friend here has been holding out on us. What do you think? Does she look like someone who knows how to throw a punch?" Tyler circled around to Emma's left side, forcing her to track multiple threats simultaneously. Maybe we should find out. See if all that attitude is backed up by anything real. Emma's mind raced through possibilities and calculations. 3 opponents in a confined space with limited escape routes. Tyler was the most dangerous in terms of unpredictability, likely to escalate to violence quickly, but without much skill or strategy. Marcus was the tactical thinker, probably the one to watch for coordinated attacks. Brandon was the leader, which meant he would want to maintain control of the situation and demonstrate his dominance personally. But even as her training analyzed the tactical situation, another part of her mind was screaming warnings about the consequences of any action she might take. Fighting back would mean revealing abilities she had worked hard to conceal. It would mean crossing a line from victim to participant in violence. Most importantly, it would mean abandoning the moral philosophy her father had spent years instilling in her. "I don't want to fight anyone," Emma said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. "I just want to go home." "See, that's where you're wrong," Brandon replied, his tone becoming almost pedagogical. "You don't get to want things anymore, Emma. You don't get to make choices about what you do or don't do. That's what yesterday was supposed to teach you, but apparently you're a slow learner." Tyler had moved closer, near enough now that Emma could smell the cheap body spray he used to cover up the nervous sweat that seemed to be his constant companion. His proximity was a deliberate provocation, designed to make her feel trapped and powerless, but it also put him within range of techniques that could neutralize him before the other two could react. "Maybe we need to have another bathroom lesson," Tyler suggested, his voice thick with anticipation. "But this time, somewhere even more private, somewhere she can really learn to appreciate her place." The threat was explicit enough to make Emma's blood run cold. They weren't just talking about humiliation anymore, they were discussing assault, a line that even her commitment to non-violence might not be able to prevent her from crossing if they actually attempted to carry it out. "That's an interesting idea," Brandon mused, as if they were discussing homework assignments rather than felonies. "But I think Emma needs to understand that cooperation is always the easier path. Isn't that right, Emma?" The question hung in the air like a blade, sharp with implied consequences. Emma realized that her next words would determine whether this encounter escalated into violence or remained at the level of psychological torture. Every second of silence was a choice, every breath a decision about who she was going to be in this moment. But before she could formulate a response, a new voice cut through the tension like a knife. "Hey, what's going on over there?" So all 4 teenagers turned toward the sound, and Emma's heart leaped as she recognized Lily Chen jogging toward them from the direction of the student parking lot. Lily was still 50 yards away, but her presence immediately changed the dynamics of the situation. Brandon's expression shifted from predatory confidence to calculation as he assessed this new variable. "Nothing that concerns you, Chen," Brandon called back, his voice taking on the false friendliness that he used when adults were around. "Just having a conversation with our new student here." Lily slowed her approach, but didn't stop, her dark eyes taking in the positioning of the 4 students with obvious intelligence. "Emma, are you okay?" The simple question, delivered with genuine concern, almost broke Emma's composure entirely. After weeks of isolation and fear, having someone actually ask about her welfare felt like a lifeline thrown to a drowning person. But it also created a terrible dilemma. If she admitted that she wasn't okay, she would be dragging Lily into a dangerous situation. If she lied, she would be protecting her potential ally, but also enabling Brandon's continued harassment. "She's fine," Tyler answered before Emma could speak. "We're all just getting to know each other better, right, Emma?" The emphasis on her name was a clear threat, a reminder that her answer had consequences not just for herself, but potentially for Lily as well. Emma found herself paralyzed by the complexity of the choice, torn between self-preservation and the desire to protect someone who had shown her kindness. Lily stopped about 10 feet away from the group, close enough to intervene if necessary, but far enough to maintain some safety. Her stance was alert and ready, and Emma noticed that she had her phone in her hand, though whether she was prepared to call for help or record evidence wasn't clear. "Actually, Emma, I came to find you because I left my chemistry notes in the library, and I know you have the same class with Mr. Stevens tomorrow," Lily said, her voice carefully casual, but her eyes never leaving Brandon's face. "I was hoping you could let me borrow yours so I can study for the quiz." The excuse was obviously fabricated. Emma had been sitting right next to Lily in the library and knew perfectly well that she hadn't left any notes behind. But it provided a plausible reason for interrupting the confrontation and gave Emma an opportunity to escape without appearing to flee. Brandon's jaw tightened as he recognized the tactical brilliance of Lily's intervention. He couldn't object to academic cooperation without appearing unreasonable, and the presence of a witness made it impossible for him to escalate the situation further without risking exposure. But Emma could see the anger building behind his eyes, the frustration of having his carefully planned psychological operation disrupted by an unexpected variable. "Of course," Emma said quickly, seizing the lifeline that Lily had thrown her. "I have them in my backpack." She took a step toward Lily, but Tyler moved to block her path, his nervous energy crystallizing into something more dangerous. "Hold on there, Emma. We weren't finished with our conversation." "Yes, we were," Lily said firmly, her voice carrying an authority that seemed to surprise even her. "Emma, let's go. My mom's picking me up in 10 minutes and she can give you a ride home." The mention of an adult waiting nearby was the final nail in the coffin of Brandon's plans for the afternoon. He couldn't risk having a parent discover him in what could easily be interpreted as a threatening situation, not when his carefully cultivated image as a model student was so crucial to his social position. "Fine," Brandon said, his voice tight with controlled anger. "But Emma, don't forget about that homework assignment we discussed. I'll be very disappointed if you don't turn it in tomorrow." The threat was clear despite the coded language, and Emma nodded mutely as she moved past Tyler toward Lily. Her legs felt unsteady, adrenaline and relief making her movements awkward and uncertain. Lily fell into step beside her, and together they walked toward the gap between the buildings that led back to civilization. But as they reached the narrow passage, Brandon's voice followed them one last time. "Oh, and Emma, next time, make sure. Your friend understands that interrupting private conversations can be very dangerous for everyone involved." The words were directed at Emma, but they were clearly meant for Lily to hear, a warning about the consequences of further interference. Emma felt Lily stiffen beside her, but the other girl didn't respond directly to the threat. Instead, she kept walking, her hand finding Emma's elbow in a gesture of support and solidarity. They didn't speak until they were well clear of the gymnasium and back in the relative safety of the student parking lot, where a few cars still remained, and the presence of other people made violence unlikely. Only then did Lily stop walking and turn to face Emma directly. "Okay, what the hell was that about?" Lily asked, her carefully maintained composure finally cracking to reveal the fear and anger underneath. "Because that didn't look like a friendly conversation to me." Emma opened her mouth to deflect, to minimize what had happened, to protect Lily from the truth of her situation. But the words wouldn't come. Standing there in the fading afternoon light, looking at someone who had literally put herself at risk to help a near stranger, Emma found that she couldn't bring herself to lie anymore. "Brandon and his friends have been bothering me," she said finally, the euphemism feeling inadequate but being all she could manage without breaking down entirely. "Bothering you how?" Lily pressed, her journalist's instincts clearly activated by the evasive language. Emma struggled to find words that would convey the reality of her situation without revealing the most humiliating details. "They've made it clear that they don't think I belong here, that I need to be taught my place." Lily's expression darkened as she processed the implications of Emma's careful phrasing. "Have they hurt you? Physically, I mean." The question was direct and impossible to evade, forcing Emma to confront the reality that what she had experienced went beyond simple bullying into something much more serious. The bathroom incident, the forced degradation, the threats of escalation. It all added up to a pattern of systematic abuse that had a name, even if she was reluctant to use it. "Not exactly," Emma said, then immediately realized how inadequate that answer was. "I mean, they haven't hit me or anything like that, but they've made me do things, humiliating things." Lily's face went pale as the full implications hit her. "Emma, that's not okay. That's not normal teenage conflict. That's harassment, maybe assault. You need to report this to someone." "To who?" Emma asked, her voice bitter with weeks of accumulated frustration. "Brandon's father is a major donor to the school's athletic programs. Tyler's mother runs the PTA. Marcus's family owns half the businesses in town. Who exactly is going to believe me over them?" The pragmatism of Emma's assessment clearly frustrated Lily, but she couldn't argue with the logic. Small-town politics were complicated, and the influence of wealthy families could make justice a luxury that not everyone could afford. "There has to be something we can do," Lily said, pacing back and forth in front of Emma like a caged animal. "Some way to gather evidence, to document what they're doing. If we could prove—" "We?" Emma interrupted, her voice sharp with alarm. "Lily, no! You can't get involved in this. You saw what Brandon said back there. These people are dangerous, and I won't let you become a target because of me." "Too late," Lily replied with a grim smile. "I'm already involved. The moment I walked over there and interrupted whatever they were planning, I made myself part of this situation. And honestly, I'm glad I did." Emma stared at her in amazement, unable to comprehend why anyone would voluntarily choose to stand against Brandon and his crew. The isolation she had experienced for weeks had made her forget that solidarity was possible, that someone might choose to share risk rather than avoid it. "Why?" Emma asked quietly. "You barely know me. Why would you put yourself in danger for a stranger?" Lily stopped pacing and looked directly at Emma, her expression intense and determined. "Because I know what it's like to feel powerless. I know what it's like to be afraid to come to school, to spend every day looking over your shoulder, wondering when the next attack is coming." The admission hung between them, creating an unexpected moment of vulnerability and connection. Emma realized that Lily's confidence and social ease might be more carefully constructed than they appeared, armor designed to protect against threats that were all too familiar. "Brandon and his friends?" Emma asked. "Different bullies, but the same basic playbook," Lily confirmed. "8th grade was hell for me. They targeted me because I was smart, because I didn't fit in, because I had the wrong clothes and the wrong interests and the wrong responses to their idea of normal teenage behavior." Emma felt a surge of empathy for the younger version of Lily, the scared middle schooler who had somehow transformed herself into the confident young woman standing before her. "What changed?" "I got angry," Lily said simply, "not just sad or scared, but furious. And I realized that my anger was only useful if I channeled it into action. So I learned everything I could about technology, about systems, about how to gather information and use it strategically. I made myself into someone who couldn't be easily dismissed or ignored." The transformation Lily described sounded like a form of self-rescue that Emma could barely imagine. The idea of turning victimization into empowerment, of weaponizing knowledge and skill against oppression, was both inspiring and terrifying. That's not the same thing as taking on Brandon Cole, Emma pointed out. He's not some middle school bully you can outsmart with better grades and computer skills. No, he's not, Lily agreed. He's worse. He's smarter, more connected, more dangerous in every way. But that also means the satisfaction of bringing him down would be proportionally greater. Emma felt a chill at the casual way Lily discussed bringing down someone as powerful as Brandon. It suggested a level of confidence and capability that seemed almost reckless, a willingness to escalate conflicts that Emma wasn't sure she was prepared to match. "I don't want revenge," Emma said carefully. "I just want to be left alone. I want to finish high school and go to college and never think about any of this again." "That's a beautiful dream," Lily replied, her tone gentle but realistic. "But do you really think Brandon is going to let that happen? Do you think he's going to just get bored and move on to other targets? From what I saw back there, this is personal for him now. You're not just a random victim. You're a project." The assessment hit Emma like a physical blow because she recognized its accuracy. Brandon's escalating demands, his detailed psychological manipulation, the way he seemed to take genuine pleasure in her degradation, it all pointed to someone who had developed a personal investment in her destruction. "So, what are you suggesting?" Emma asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to hear the answer. "I'm suggesting we fight back," Lily said simply. "Not with fists or weapons or anything that gets us expelled or arrested, but with information, with evidence, with smart strategy and careful planning. I'm suggesting we make Brandon Cole's life as complicated as he's made yours." Emma's first instinct was to reject the proposal immediately. Everything about it went against her training, her philosophy, her commitment to non-violence and moral behavior. But as she stood there in the parking lot, remembering the feel of that bathroom floor under her palms and the sound of Tyler's laughter, she found herself considering possibilities she would never have entertained just days before. "What kind of evidence?" she asked quietly. Lily's smile was sharp and predatory, transforming her from helpful classmate into something much more dangerous. The kind that shows Brandon and his friends for what they really are. The kind that makes it impossible for them to hide behind their family's money and influence. The kind that gives us leverage. Emma felt a flutter of something that might have been hope or might have been fear. The two emotions had become so intertwined in recent weeks that she could no longer tell them apart. "You really think we could do something against people like them?" "I think," Lily said slowly, "that people like Brandon Cole are only powerful as long as they can control the narrative. As long as they can decide what gets seen and what gets hidden, what gets reported and what gets buried. But technology has changed those rules, Emma. Now anyone with a smartphone and an internet connection can document truth and share it with the world." The implications of what Lily was suggesting began to crystallize in Emma's mind, not just passive resistance or strategic avoidance, but active opposition. Not just surviving Brandon's harassment, but exposing it. Not just protecting herself, but potentially protecting future victims. "It would be dangerous," Emma said, though she was no longer arguing against the idea so much as testing its feasibility. "Everything worthwhile is dangerous," Lily replied. "The question is whether you're more afraid of the risks of action or the certainty of continued victimization." Emma considered the choice as they walked toward the main road where Lily's mother would presumably pick them up. Behind them, Riverside High loomed against the darkening sky, its windows reflecting the last rays of sunlight like watching eyes. Somewhere in that building, Brandon Cole was probably planning his next move in their ongoing campaign of psychological warfare. Tomorrow would bring new humiliations, fresh threats, escalating demands that would push her further and further from the person she had once been, unless she chose to push back. "If we do this," Emma said finally, "if we actually try to fight them, there's no going back. Once we start, we're committed to seeing it through to the end." "I know," Lily said. Simply, "Are you ready for that kind of commitment?" Emma thought about her father, about the principles he had tried to instill in her, about the difference between violence and justice. She thought about the martial arts philosophy that emphasized protection of the innocent and resistance to oppression. She thought about the version of herself that had existed before fear and isolation had worn her down to a shadow of her former strength. "Yes," she said, the word emerging with a certainty that surprised her. "I'm ready." As if summoned by her declaration, a silver sedan pulled up to the curb with Lily's mother behind the wheel. The woman looked to be in her early 40s with short black hair and the kind of professional attire that suggested important meetings and serious responsibilities. "Mom, this is Emma, the friend I told you about," Lily said as they approached the car. "Emma, my mom, Dr. Chen." Dr. Chen leaned across the passenger seat to get a better look at Emma through the open window. Her expression was warm but assessing, the look of someone accustomed to evaluating people quickly and accurately. "Nice to meet you, Emma," Dr. Chen said. "Lily mentioned you might need a ride. Everything okay?" Emma glanced at Lily, uncertain how much her new ally had shared with her family about the situation at school. Lily gave her an almost imperceptible shake of the head, indicating that discretion was still required. "Just some confusion about homework assignments," Emma said, falling back on the cover story that had gotten them out of the confrontation with Brandon. "Lily was helping me sort it out." Dr. Chen nodded, though her eyes suggested she sensed undercurrents in the interaction that weren't being fully explained. "Well, climb in. I'll drop you wherever you need to go." As they drove through the streets of Millbrook toward Emma's apartment complex, the conversation remained light and superficial. School subjects, weekend plans, the kind of small talk that fills space without revealing anything important. But underneath the normal teenage chatter, Emma felt the weight of the commitment she had just made, the partnership she had agreed to enter into. When Dr. Chen pulled up in front of the Riverside apartments, Emma turned to thank both of them for the ride. But Lily caught her eye in the rearview mirror, her expression serious and determined. "I'll see you tomorrow," Lily said, the words carrying implications that went far beyond casual school friendship. "We have a lot to talk about." Emma nodded, understanding that their conversation that afternoon had been only the beginning of something much larger and more complex. As she climbed out of the car and watched the Chen family drive away into the gathering darkness, she felt the first stirrings of something she hadn't experienced in weeks, hope. But hope, she knew, was a dangerous thing. It could make you careless, make you take risks you weren't prepared for. It could also make you stronger, give you reason to fight when fighting seemed impossible. Standing in front of her apartment building, looking up at the lighted windows that marked other people's normal lives, Emma Rodriguez made a final decision. Tomorrow, she would stop being a victim. Tomorrow, she would remember what it felt like to be dangerous. The girl who walked into the Riverside apartments that evening was still afraid, still hurt, still marked by weeks of systematic degradation. But she was no longer alone. And in the mathematics of high school power dynamics, that single variable could change everything. The gymnasium at Riverside High had never felt more like a gladiatorial arena than it did on the Friday afternoon, when Emma Rodriguez finally stopped running from who she really was. The late autumn sun slanted through the high windows, casting long rectangles of golden light across the polished wooden floor where the wrestling mats had been rolled out for Coach Martinez's after-school training session. The air smelled of sweat and determination, of rubber mats and the industrial cleaner that couldn't quite mask the accumulated intensity of decades of athletic competition. Emma stood at the edge of the gymnasium, her heart hammering against her ribs as she watched Coach Martinez guide a handful of dedicated wrestlers through their conditioning routines. She had been standing there for 10 minutes, working up the courage to approach him with Lily's carefully planned strategy. Behind her, Lily waited in the shadows of the equipment room, her phone ready to document whatever happened next, her laptop connected to the school's wireless network through a series of digital pathways that would be impossible for administrators to trace back to either of them. The past week had transformed Emma's understanding of what was possible when intelligence met determination. Lily's technological skills were even more sophisticated than Emma had initially realized. The girl who presented herself as a helpful student with an interest in computers was actually a digital surveillance expert capable of infiltrating systems that should have been beyond the reach of any high school student. Together, they had spent hours mapping Brandon's routines, identifying his vulnerabilities, and preparing for this moment when passive resistance would give way to active confrontation. The plan was elegant in its simplicity and terrifying in its implications. Emma would provoke Brandon into a physical confrontation in a controlled environment where witnesses and recording equipment could capture his true nature. She would use her martial arts training, not to injure him seriously, but to defend herself with such skill and precision that no one could doubt who the real aggressor was. The video evidence would be immediately uploaded to multiple platforms, making it impossible for Brandon's family influence to suppress or control the narrative. But plans, Emma knew from her father's training, rarely survived contact with reality. Unchanged, the variables were too numerous, the human element too unpredictable. Brandon might not take the bait. The recordings might fail. The school administration might find ways to protect their star athlete regardless of evidence. Most importantly, Emma might discover that her philosophical commitment to restraint and proportional response would crumble under the pressure of real violence. Coach Martinez noticed her presence and approached with the measured stride of someone accustomed to reading body language and emotional states. At 45, Ricardo Martinez carried himself with the bearing of a man who had seen combat in places most people only read about in newspapers, who had learned to evaluate threats and opportunities with the calm assessment that kept soldiers alive in hostile territory. His dark eyes took in Emma's tense posture, her clenched fists, the way she kept glancing toward the main entrance, as if expecting trouble to walk through it at any moment. "Rodriguez," he said, using the military-style address that had initially intimidated her but now felt oddly comforting. "You look like someone with something serious on her mind. What can I do for you?" Emma took a deep breath, tasting the familiar gymnasium air and feeling the solid floor beneath her feet. This was it, the moment when she stopped being a victim and started being something else entirely. "Coach Martinez, I need to ask you something, and I need you to hear me out completely before you respond." Coach Martinez's expression sharpened, with interest and concern. In his years of teaching and coaching, he had learned to recognize the signs of students in crisis, the particular tension that preceded either breakthrough or breakdown. "I'm listening." If a student was being systematically harassed by other students, and if that harassment had escalated to physical intimidation and forced degradation, and if the harassers were protected by family influence that made normal, disciplinary channels ineffective, what would you advise that student to do? The question was carefully phrased to sound hypothetical while conveying the essential reality of her situation. Coach Martinez studied her face for a long moment, his military experience evident in the way he processed information and calculated responses. "This hypothetical student," he said slowly, "would she have any particular skills or training that might be relevant to self-defense?" Emma felt heat rise in her cheeks as she realized that Coach Martinez had already intuited more about her situation than she had intended to reveal. She might, but she's been taught that those skills should only be used as a last resort and only to protect others or prevent serious harm. Those are good principles, Coach Martinez agreed, but they assume that other adults in authority positions are able to provide protection and justice when students can't protect themselves. What happens when those assumptions prove false? The question cut to the heart of Emma's dilemma, the philosophical crisis that had paralyzed her for weeks. Her father's teachings emphasized restraint and moral clarity, but they had been formulated in a world where honor meant something, where authorities could be trusted to protect the innocent. The reality of Riverside High was messier, more corrupt, less amenable to simple ethical frameworks. I think, Emma said carefully, that this student might be forced to protect herself in ways that go against her training. And I think she might need witnesses when that happens, people who can testify that she acted in self-defense rather than aggression. Coach Martinez nodded slowly, understanding passing between them like a current of electricity. This gymnasium is monitored by security cameras, he said matter-of-factly. Those cameras record everything that happens here during school hours and for 2 hours afterward. They're maintained by the district security office, not by individual school administrators. Emma felt her pulse quicken as she realized what he was telling her. District-level security would be much harder for Brandon's family to influence than school-level administrators. Video evidence captured by official cameras would carry more weight than anything Lily could record with her phone. This hypothetical student, Coach Martinez continued, she would want to make sure that any confrontation happened in full view of those cameras. And she would want to make sure that her response to aggression was clearly proportional and defensive rather than retaliatory. What if the harassers tried to provoke her into an overreaction? Emma asked. What if they said things designed to make her lose control? Then she would need to demonstrate the mental discipline that separates a trained martial artist from a common brawler, Coach Martinez replied. She would need to show that her skills come with wisdom, not just power. Emma nodded, feeling pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. Coach Martinez wasn't just offering tactical advice. He was providing her with a framework for maintaining her moral integrity even while defending herself. The distinction between revenge and justice, between aggression and protection, would be crucial to whatever happened next. Coach, Emma said quietly, if this hypothetical situation became real, if this student found herself in a position where she had to act, would you be willing to serve as a witness to what actually happened? Coach Martinez's expression became grave as he considered the implications of what she was asking. Supporting a student against powerful families could have serious consequences for his career, his reputation, his ability to continue teaching and coaching. But Emma could see the moment when his personal ethics overcame his professional caution. Rodriguez, he said firmly, I became a teacher because I believe in protecting young people from predators. I don't care how much money their families donate to the school district. If someone is hurting my students, I will stand up for what's right. Emma felt tears threatening to blur her vision as the weight of having an adult ally finally settled on her shoulders. For weeks, she had felt completely alone, abandoned by systems that should have protected her. Now, for the first time since arriving at Riverside High, she had reason to believe that justice might actually be possible. Thank you, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. That means more to me than you know. Coach Martinez placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, the contact brief but powerfully reassuring. Just remember, whatever happens, your response has to be proportional. Defend yourself, protect others if necessary, But don't let anger turn you into the aggressor. That's how good people become the villains in someone else's story. Emma nodded, committing his words to memory alongside her father's teachings about honor and restraint. As Coach Martinez returned to his wrestlers, she retreated to where Lily waited in the equipment room, her mind already shifting into the focused state that her martial arts training had ingrained in her. "Did he agree to help?" Lily asked, her fingers dancing across her laptop keyboard as she made final adjustments to their surveillance setup. "He did," Emma confirmed, "and he told me about the district security cameras. We won't just have your recordings. We'll have official footage that Brandon's family can't suppress." Lily's smile was sharp with satisfaction. "Perfect. I've been monitoring Brandon's text messages. Don't ask how. And he's planning to corner you again after wrestling practice ends. He's told Tyler and Marcus to meet him in the gym at 5:30. That gives us 20 minutes to get ready." Emma felt her stomach clench with a mixture of anticipation and terror. After weeks of planning and preparation, the moment of truth was finally at hand. In less than half an hour, she would face Brandon Cole in direct confrontation. And one way or another, her time as a victim would end. "Are you sure about the timing?" Emma asked, checking her phone nervously. "Positive," Lily replied, showing Emma the intercepted messages on her screen. "Brandon thinks he's being clever, waiting until most people have left the building. He doesn't realize we've been tracking his patterns for days." Emma began the stretching routine that her father had taught her, the familiar movements helping to center her mind and prepare her body for what was to come. Each stretch was a form of meditation, a way of connecting with the years of training that had shaped her into someone capable of defending herself and others. Her muscles remembered the patterns, even when her conscious mind was paralyzed by fear. "Emma," Lily said quietly, "are you absolutely sure about this? Once we start, there's no going back. Brandon isn't going to just forget about this if it goes wrong." "I'm sure," Emma replied, though her voice carried a tremor that betrayed her underlying anxiety. "I can't keep living in fear, and if we don't stop him now, he's just going to find other victims after he's finished destroying me." Lily nodded, understanding the weight of responsibility that Emma was taking on. They weren't just fighting for Emma's freedom. They were potentially protecting every vulnerable student who might cross Brandon's path in the future. The minutes ticked by with agonizing slowness as they waited for the confrontation to begin. Coach Martinez dismissed his wrestlers at exactly 5:15, the young athletes filing out of the gymnasium with the satisfied exhaustion that came from hard training. A few lingered to chat with friends or gather their equipment, but by 5:25, the vast space was empty except for Emma, Lily, and the echoing silence of a building settling into evening. At 5:28, the main doors to the gymnasium opened with a metallic clang that seemed to reverberate through Emma's bones. Brandon Cole entered first, his letterman jacket pristine and his blonde hair styled with the casual perfection that required significant time and expensive products. Behind him came Tyler Nash and Marcus Webb, their postures radiating the confident aggression of predators who believed they had cornered their prey. But as they approached the center of the gymnasium where Emma stood waiting, Brandon's expression shifted from confident cruelty to confusion, and then to something approaching wariness. Something was different about Emma's posture, her demeanor, the way she held herself in the space. Gone was the hunched shoulder submission that had marked all their previous encounters. In its place was a balanced, centered stance that spoke of training and preparation. "Well, well," Brandon said, his voice echoing in the empty gymnasium. "Look who finally decided to stop running. I was beginning to think you were going to make this difficult." "I'm not running anymore," Emma replied, her voice steady and clear. "I'm tired of being afraid of you." Tyler giggled nervously, the sound sharp and ugly in the vast space. "Did you hear that, Brandon? Little Mouse thinks she's grown some claws." "Careful, Tyler," Marcus warned, his cold gray eyes studying Emma with the calculating assessment of someone who recognized potential danger when he saw it. Something's different about her. Brandon waved off Marcus's concern with the arrogant dismissal of someone who had never faced real opposition. "She's just trying to seem tough. Probably thinks if she acts brave, we'll leave her alone. But it doesn't work that way, does it, Emma? Respect has to be earned." "You're right," Emma agreed, taking a small step forward that closed the distance between them by just enough to shift the tactical dynamics of the situation. "Respect does have to be earned, and you haven't earned mine." The directness of her challenge sent a visible shock through all three boys. In weeks of harassment, Emma had never once stood up to them directly, never challenged their authority or questioned their right to torment her. This was uncharted territory, and Brandon's uncertainty showed in the way his confident smile flickered and threatened to disappear entirely. "What did you just say to me?" Brandon asked, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "I said you haven't earned my respect," Emma repeated, her martial arts training helping her maintain perfect calm even as adrenaline flooded her system. "You're just a bully who uses his family's money and his friends' help to terrorize people who can't. Fight back. That's not strength. That's cowardice." Tyler's nervous energy exploded into motion as he stepped forward aggressively, his hands balled into fists. "You little..." "Tyler, stop," Marcus commanded, his voice sharp with warning. "Look at her stance. Look at how she's standing." For the first time, all three boys really examined Emma's posture with the attention it deserved. Her feet were positioned for optimal balance and mobility, her weight distributed evenly, her hands relaxed. But ready. Everything about her body language spoke of someone who knew exactly how to handle herself in a physical confrontation. "What the hell?" Brandon breathed, finally understanding that the terrified victim he had been tormenting for weeks had been hiding capabilities that could change everything about their dynamic. 8 years of karate training," Emma said simply. "Third-degree black belt. I could have ended this the first day you pushed me, but I was taught that martial arts should only be used to protect people, not to hurt them." "You're bluffing," Tyler snarled, though his voice carried a note of uncertainty that suggested he wasn't entirely convinced. "If you really knew how to fight, you would have done something before now." "I was hoping you would get bored and move on to easier targets," Emma admitted. "I was trying to avoid violence because my father taught me that the greatest warriors are those who win without fighting. But you've made it clear that you're never going to stop. So now, I'm going to teach you what real strength looks like." Brandon's face flushed red with humiliation and rage as he realized the implications of what Emma was revealing. For weeks, he had been systematically degrading someone who could have destroyed him at any moment. The bathroom incident, the forced submission, all the careful psychological torture, it had been inflicted on someone who had chosen to submit rather than fight back. The revelation made him look weak, stupid, utterly outmaneuvered by a girl he had dismissed as helpless. "You think you're so smart," Brandon snarled, his carefully maintained facade crumbling into naked fury. "You think having some karate lessons makes you tough? Let me show you what real power looks like." He lunged forward with the awkward aggression of someone who had never had to actually fight for anything in his life, his anger making him sloppy and predictable. Emma sidestepped his charge with fluid grace, her movement so economical and precise that Brandon stumbled past her and nearly fell. The contrast between his wild flailing and her controlled response was stark enough to make Tyler and Marcus exchange worried glances. "That was your free shot," Emma said calmly as Brandon turned to face her again, his face now purple with embarrassment and rage. "The next time you come at me, I'm going to defend myself." "We'll see about that," Brandon growled, motioning to Tyler and Marcus. take her down, all three of us together. It was the crucial moment, the point where Brandon's intent shifted. From harassment to assault, where Emma's right to defend herself became legally and morally unambiguous. Hidden in the equipment room, Lily's cameras captured every word, every gesture, every detail that would matter when lawyers and administrators tried to determine what had really happened. Tyler rushed forward first, his nervous energy finally, finding an outlet in violence. But 8 years of training had taught Emma to read an opponent's intentions in their posture, their breathing, the subtle telegraph of their intended strikes. She could see Tyler's clumsy haymaker coming from the moment he began to move, and her response was automatic and devastating. Emma stepped inside Tyler's swing, her left hand deflecting his punch, while her right drove a precise strike into his solar plexus. The technique was designed to incapacitate without causing permanent damage, and Tyler dropped to his knees, gasping for air, his face turning grey as his diaphragm spasmed and refused to function properly. Marcus approached more cautiously, recognizing that Emma's skills were far beyond anything they had anticipated. But caution couldn't compensate for the fundamental mismatch between his amateur aggression and her professional training. When he finally committed to an attack, Emma used his own momentum against him, executing a perfect hip throw that sent him tumbling across the wrestling mats with bone-jarring impact. Brandon found himself facing Emma alone, his two allies neutralized in a matter of seconds by someone he had spent weeks treating as helpless prey. The gymnasium suddenly felt vast and empty, the silence broken only by Tyler's labored breathing and Marcus's groans of pain. "This is your last chance," Emma said quietly. Her hands relaxed at her sides, but her body coiled with potential energy. "Walk away now, leave me alone, and this ends here. Keep coming, and I'll defend myself with whatever force is necessary." But Brandon's pride, his reputation, his entire self-image as the dominant predator in Riverside High's ecosystem, it all depended on his ability to maintain control through intimidation and violence. Walking away wasn't just retreat. It was the complete collapse of everything he believed about himself and his place in the world. "You're going to pay for this," he snarled, pulling a knife from his jacket pocket, a switchblade that gleamed wickedly in the gymnasium's fluorescent lighting. "You're going to pay for every second of humiliation." The appearance of the weapon changed everything, transforming what had been a schoolyard scuffle into something much more serious and potentially deadly. Emma felt her training take over, completely, her conscious mind stepping aside to let years of practice guide her responses. This was what her father had prepared her for, not tournament competition or demonstration forms, but the real possibility of life or death violence. "Drop the knife, Brandon," she said, her voice carrying an authority that seemed to echo in the empty gymnasium. "Drop it now, and we can still end this without anyone getting seriously hurt." "Shut up!" Brandon screamed, lunging forward with the blade extended toward Emma's midsection. "Just shut up and die!" Emma's response was a thing of terrible beauty, 8 years of training compressed into a sequence of movements so precise and economical that they seemed almost choreographed. She stepped offline from Brandon's attack while simultaneously blocking his knife hand with her left forearm, her right hand driving forward in a palm strike that caught him squarely in the chest and sent him flying backward. Brandon hit the gymnasium floor hard, the knife skittering away across the polished wood as the impact drove the air from his lungs. He lay there gasping like a fish out of water, while Emma stood over him, perfectly balanced and completely in control. "It's over," Emma said simply, her voice carrying the quiet authority of someone who had just demonstrated exactly what she was capable of when pushed to her limits. "The harassment stops now. You're going to leave me alone. You're going to leave everyone else alone, or next time I won't be so gentle." In the equipment room, Lily's fingers flew across her keyboard as she uploaded the video footage to multiple platforms simultaneously. YouTube, social media sites, cloud storage services that would preserve the evidence even if local authorities tried to suppress it. The entire confrontation had been captured in high definition, from Brandon's explicit threats to his use of a weapon to Emma's perfectly controlled defensive response. Coach Martinez appeared in the gymnasium doorway, drawn by the sounds of conflict, his expression shifting from concern to grim satisfaction as he took in the scene. 3 boys on the ground, 1 girl standing calmly in the center of it all, and a knife lying abandoned on the floor as evidence of how far the situation had escalated. "Is everyone all right?" he asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. "Everyone's fine," Emma replied, her breathing barely elevated despite the intensity of what had just occurred. Brandon and his friends were just leaving. Coach Martinez's eyes found the knife on the floor, and his expression hardened with the kind of cold anger that came from someone who had seen too much violence in too many places. "I think we need to have a conversation with Principal Johnson about this incident, and with the police." Brandon struggled to his feet, his face pale with shock and the growing realization of how completely his world had just changed. The video, evidence, the knife, the witnesses, it all added up to consequences that his family's influence might not be able to shield him from. "This isn't over," he wheezed, though the threat sounded hollow even to his own ears. "Yes, it is," Emma replied, with quiet certainty, "and if you're smart, you'll make sure it stays that way." Within hours, the video of Emma's confrontation with Brandon Cole had spread across social media like wildfire, transforming her from an unknown transfer student into an overnight sensation. The footage showed everything: Brandon's explicit threats, his use of a weapon, Emma's remarkably restrained response that neutralized 3 attackers without causing serious injury to any of them. Legal experts called it a textbook case of proportional self-defense. Martial arts instructors praised Emma's discipline and control under extreme pressure. The investigation that followed was swift and thorough. Brandon Cole was arrested on charges of assault with a deadly weapon. His college scholarship offers withdrawn, his carefully constructed image as a model student-athlete destroyed in a matter of days. Tyler Nash and Marcus Webb faced lesser charges but sufficient consequences to ensure they would never again terrorize vulnerable classmates with impunity. Principal Johnson, faced with irrefutable video evidence and mounting public pressure, had no choice but to acknowledge the systematic harassment that Emma had endured and the school's failure to protect her. Policy changes were implemented immediately, new anti-bullying protocols established, and the district's handling of the situation became a model for other schools dealing with similar problems. But for Emma Rodriguez, the most important changes were personal rather than institutional. The girl who had spent weeks hiding her capabilities, suppressing her strength, diminishing herself to avoid conflict, had finally remembered who she really was. The martial arts training her father had given her wasn't just about physical techniques. It was about the courage to stand up for what was right, the wisdom to use strength responsibly, and the understanding that sometimes protecting others required personal risk. 3 months later, Emma stood in the same gymnasium where her confrontation with Brandon had taken place. But now the space buzzed with the energy of the new martial arts program she had helped Coach Martinez establish. Students of all ages and skill levels gathered twice a week to learn not just self-defense techniques, but the philosophy and discipline that transformed physical training into character development. Lily Chen was there too, her laptop replaced by a training uniform as she worked to master the basic stances that would eventually grow into advanced techniques. She had discovered that the analytical mind that made her such a gifted programmer also gave her insights into the systematic nature of martial arts training, the way individual movements combined into larger patterns of knowledge and capability. "Remember," Emma called out to the group of new students, her voice carrying easily through the gymnasium. "Martial arts isn't about being able to hurt people. It's about being strong enough that you don't have to hurt people. It's about having the confidence to walk away from fights you don't need to have, and the ability to protect yourself and others when walking away isn't an option." The students nodded solemnly. These young people who had come to the program because they had been bullied, because they felt powerless, because they wanted to transform their fear into strength, just as Emma had done. Some were small and quiet, like she had been. Others were loud and angry and looking for an outlet for their frustration. All of them were searching for the same thing, the understanding that true power came from within, that respect had to be earned rather than demanded, that courage was something you could develop through practice and patience. After class ended and the other students had departed, Emma remained in the gymnasium, practicing the advanced forms that her father had taught her years earlier. The movements flowed together like a dance, each technique precise and purposeful. The accumulated wisdom of generations of martial artists made manifest in her controlled grace. Coach Martinez watched from the doorway, recognizing in Emma's practice the same dedication and discipline that had made her father so proud. "He would be proud of you," he said quietly, "not just for what you did to Brandon, but for what you're doing now, teaching others, building something positive from your experience." Emma paused in her practice, sweat beading on her forehead, despite the gymnasium's air conditioning. "I hope so. Sometimes I wonder if I handled everything the right way, if maybe there was a path that didn't involve violence at all." "There wasn't," Coach Martinez said, with the certainty of someone who had seen enough conflict to understand its necessities. "Some people only understand strength. Brandon Cole was never going to stop until someone made him stop. You did what you had to do, and you did it with honor." Emma nodded, accepting his assessment while continuing to grapple with the complexities of her choices. The martial arts philosophy her father had taught her emphasized the preference for peaceful resolution, but it also acknowledged the reality that sometimes violence was the only language that aggressors understood. Finding the balance between those principles would be a lifelong challenge, but it was one she was prepared to meet. As she resumed her practice, moving through the familiar patterns that connected her to her father's memory and her own inner strength, Emma Rodriguez understood that her story was far from over. The girl who had once knelt in a filthy bathroom, who had submitted to degradation rather than reveal her capabilities, had transformed into something far more powerful. A protector, a teacher, a living example of what was possible when courage met training and wisdom guided strength. Outside the gymnasium windows, the sun was setting over Millbrook, Ohio, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson that promised both endings and new beginnings. Somewhere in that town, other students were struggling with their own demons, facing their own bullies, searching for their own paths to empowerment. And in the morning, Emma would be there to help them find their way, just as Lily had helped her, just as Coach Martinez had provided support when it mattered most. The cycle of violence that had defined Brandon Cole's reign of terror at Riverside High had been broken, replaced by something better, a community of people committed to protecting each other, to standing up for what was right, to ensuring that strength served justice rather than cruelty. It wasn't a perfect solution, because perfect solutions didn't exist in a world where human nature included both nobility and brutality. But it was progress, measurable and meaningful, built on the foundation of one girl's decision to stop being afraid and start being dangerous to those who would prey on the innocent. Emma Rodriguez had learned that courage wasn't the absence of fear, it was action in spite of fear. She had discovered that true strength came not from the ability to defeat enemies, but from the wisdom to know when defeat was necessary and the restraint to use only the force required. Most importantly, she had understood that the greatest victory wasn't personal vindication, but the creation of a world where others wouldn't have to face the same battles she had fought. As the gymnasium fell silent and the last light faded from the western sky, Emma gathered her equipment and prepared to head home to her mother, who was finally working day shifts again, and who never failed to tell her how proud she was of the young woman her daughter had become. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new students to teach, new opportunities to build something better from the ashes of what had been broken. But tonight, Emma Rodriguez walked out of Riverside High with her head held high, secure in the knowledge that she had kept faith with her father's teachings while forging her own path forward. The scared transfer student who had arrived in Millbrook just months earlier was gone, replaced by someone stronger, wiser, and infinitely more dangerous to those who would mistake kindness for weakness. The transformation was complete, but the story would continue. Not just Emma's story, but the stories of all the students she would teach, all the victims she would empower, all the communities that would be made safer by the understanding that true strength serves others rather than itself. In the end, that was her father's greatest gift to her, not just the ability to defend herself, but the wisdom to use that ability in service of something larger than personal vengeance. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.